Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Ayesha, your host. We've had conversations about how Muslims approach marriage, but what about after marriage? How does Islam view this relationship and related rights of the husband and wife? Where do in-laws come in? Let's explore these questions and more with none other than Dr. Shabir Ally. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
My pleasure to be on.
So we're talking about marriage in Islam. So beginning with the basics, does one spouse have rights over, have preferential treatment over the other in terms of from a gender perspective?
In the Quran, what we see basically is that there is an equality between the spouses. There is one verse in the Quran which gives rise to a discussion about, what privileges the husband may have over the wife, because it says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. The women in marriage will have similar rights to the obligations that are due upon them according to what is customarily known. And then it continues to say, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ, and the men have a degree over them. So this presents a puzzle. Imam al-Tabari, the great commentator on the Quran, said that the two statements seem to be in some tension with each other, because if she has equal rights, then how could the husband have a degree over her? So this was not so very clear. Initially it presents a puzzle. So what's the answer to this puzzle? The answer is not entirely clear, but one suggestion may be that in that traditional society, that was the nature of things, whereas in fact the desire of God is that the men and women should be equal in the relationship, but the status quo at the time was such that men do enjoy a certain degree of latitude over their wives.
Is there anything in the Quran, or I guess this has been an understanding rather, that are there set roles and responsibilities of the husband and the wife that from an Islamic perspective must be adhered to?
Yeah, generally the classical scholars would say that the woman in a marriage has the right to her own property. She keeps her own name after marriage. She has a right to separate living quarters and to privacy. She has a right to maintenance. Now we're thinking in that traditional society where men were usually the breadwinners. So the men were responsible for looking after the women folk, and including and especially their wives. On the other hand, they said that men had, and this is how they described it in classical times, that the men had unlimited sexual access to their wives, and this seems to have been the primary duty of the wife. So a few scholars would have maintained that the wife is also responsible for cooking and cleaning and things like that, but most would have said that it's just that one thing. The woman in entering into this marriage relationship is granting her husband sexual access to herself. Of course, much of this will be rethought in our modern times and is being rethought, but I'm just describing how it was put.
So what about today, thinking about it within today's context, where in a lot of situations the husband and the wife are breadwinners? How do you sort of approach it from that perspective then?
Well, a lot of this is new, and much more thinking has to be done. We have classical books which have framed the details of our laws as they are widely known, and many of our Muslim leaders are still trained in that traditional context, in which this is what they have learned, and this is what they had to reproduce on an exam, and this is what they know, so when they speak it comes out. A lot of this sort of classical way of thinking of things, and very little adjustment has been made for this modern reality in which women are much more into the workforce, and in many cases women are equally breadwinners along with their husbands, and in fact there might be cases where the woman earns more than her husband.
Yeah, that's true and common, I think, in a lot of situations these days. And I'm going to get into a topic I think that might get a little contentious. What about in some situations where a couple may choose either to save up money or, there's an expectation or agreement between the son and the parents that once he gets married, that his wife has to live with them. So there's a co-living arrangement with the in-laws. So what are sort of, I guess, some Islamic guidelines to help around this?
Yeah, well, what I've learned from common experience among Muslims is that situations like this hardly work out for the better, in that when the spouse moves into the house along with one's parents, a friction is almost inevitable. And the best living arrangement seems to be that the couple gets married and lives separately, and of course they don't live too far away if they can help it, so that there are regular visitations and so on. But to live together is fraught with difficulties and the potential for quarrels and tensions within the family. So in the case that you're describing, where there is some kind of an agreement between parents and child, okay, when you marry, you're going to bring your spouse here and live all together. I'm not sure that this is a reasonable expectation or a reasonable agreement to impose on one's children. I would advise Muslim parents to give the latitude to their children to get married and move out of the house. Here's the nest. You're welcome to come back anytime, but if we expect that you will get married and actually go fend for yourself, take on responsibility for your own dwelling, and do pay some attention to us, because that is the responsibility of a child towards his or her parents anyhow. And we would like you to recognize that.
What if a parent watching this says, well, that child technically does have rights over me and has to take care of me when I'm in old age, and that's the best way to do it? What do you say then?
Well, this is something that I don't find described in the classical texts of the Islamic faith. I have here a paper from the website peacepropagation.com. It's a list of stipulations regarding the rights of a daughter-in-law in Islam. And some of these stipulations are right on target with your question about whether the woman in a marriage has right to separate living quarters. So, for example, it says here in stipulation number 10, with regard to her living separately, her husband has to ensure that she has a place where she can live separately, but there's nothing wrong with his parents living in the same place with her if the house is big enough and if that will not cause her any harm. But more on this is that stipulation number 6, she has every right to a separate house in which she lives with her husband and children, and she has the right to privacy. If her husband wants her to live with his family, and he will not be disobeying his mother if he allows you that. Okay, so the sentence needs a little bit of deconstructing here. So she has every right to have a separate house in which she lives with her husband and children, and she has the right to privacy. If her husband wants to live with his family, and he will not be disobeying his mother if he allows you that. So it seems now it's a little bit unclear, but it seems that if the husband wants to live with his family, in a way that's fine, but the wife still has the right to a separate living quarter where she can live with her children. The wise and intelligent man weighs things against the standards of Sharia and gives each person who is entitled to rights his or her due, and so on. Okay, stipulation number 7. Her husband has to honor his parents, and she should help him in that. She should not be the cause of a split between him and them. She will see the consequences of that in her children, God willing. Number 8, her husband's visits to his parents should be on the basis of need. Something may happen to his parents which require their son to visit them a great deal, such as sickness and the like. Her husband has to pay attention to that. In such a scenario, she must cooperate well with him and assist him in taking care of his parents. But you see that they fall short here of saying that he has to live with his parents.
Yeah.
So the basic presumption is that the man marries and it provides a separate living quarter for himself and his wife and children.
What about the situation I've heard of, many stories where the wife agrees to live with the parents, but then there's a lot of mistreatment of the wife, I guess the daughter-in-law, in terms of, essentially having to work constantly, work outside of the home, work inside the home. How do you balance that from an Islamic perspective?
Well, the girl who gets married is not like a servant newly found. She has rights, and we have to recognize those rights. And in the same paper that I just introduced, this is mentioned as well. It's not that the girl has to serve not only her husband, but then her husband's parents, and then also the husband's siblings as well. In fact, this is apparently a known phenomenon, and this is why we find that it's mentioned in like a piece like this. Stipulation number 1. Daughter-in-law does not have to obey anyone among her in-laws, whether that be her husband's father, mother, brothers, or sisters, in any matter, major or minor, unless they tell her to do something which is obligatory according to Islam, or forbid her to do something that is haram. In such matters, she has to obey whether that comes from a relative or a stranger, an in-law or anyone else. And then, of course, stipulation number 2, they do not have the right to force her to do anything like how to cook, how to dress, and so on, and so on, and they do not have the right to demand that she serves them in like things like cooking and cleaning and things of that nature. And that's not just one lone source. Here I have a book entitled Baishti Zewar, and translated as Heavenly Ornaments. It's a book written by Maulana Ashraf Ali Tanvi. May God have mercy on him. He's a well-known and respected scholar from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and this book itself is highly prized. Many of the scholars from that region say that if you master this book, you're already half a scholar. Because the book is a digest of Islamic law, everything stated in brief, to the point, and as per the idea of separate residence, here it says in part 10, page 249 of this edition, Masala 1, under maintenance of the wife, and then residence, Masala 1, husband is responsible to provide a residence for his wife in which no other relative of the husband resides, so that both of them may live there freely. But if the wife herself agrees to live with other relatives of her husband, then it is permissible. So she can, by her own agreement, live with in-laws. But that's not a requirement, and that cannot be imposed upon her. Now, you had asked about aging parents, and I don't propose to have the final answer to this. In modern times, of course, there are more facilities available for aging parents to live a fairly independent life and to manage on their own with help, visits from nurses and caretakers, care providers, and so on. So that reduces the need for children to live with the parents. But in most cases, we will find that if children are dutiful enough, then their care for their parents will be the best care that can be provided. So if children can take their aging parents in to live with them, this will be a happy arrangement for everyone. They will have the satisfaction that they have cared well for their parents in their old age, and the parents will also have the, die with the knowledge that the children have been so dutiful to them right up to the very end. But having said that, we have to weigh each situation separately, because if, for example, parents are in their old age in great need of constant attention, and that will become too much of a burden on their children, maybe some other living arrangements would be more suitable. Sometimes the parents live with one sibling with the expectation that other siblings will pitch in and help and relieve some of the stress from that situation. But it's out of sight, out of mind, and the other siblings tend to neglect the parent who's living with the one sibling. So families have to discuss these matters and find a suitable arrangement so that everyone is happy. But it should not be automatic that, boy gets married, he brings the girl into the family, and then the family becomes like a domestic servant and then becomes burdened with looking after the husband's parents. She has parents of her own, and the Quran stresses the rights of our parents on us, and naturally the Quran's insistence that our parents have rights on us would mean that her parents have rights on her too. So now she cannot be like serving both sides, her own parents and also her husband's parents, unless this be by her own volunteerism. If she says, yeah, I'm happy to do that for the sake of God and to make everyone happy, and that makes me happy too, well, then yes, but it cannot be imposed upon her.
I'm sure there's lots more to say, but we're out of time, so we'll leave it for another segment. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.